Greetings and salutations, and welcome back to Colin's Last Stand right here on YouTube. My name is Colin Moriarty. I appreciate, as always, the time you're giving me today to watch this video, and I hope you enjoy it. Today I want to talk about something that has been on my mind actually for quite some time, and it's easy to make jokes about it because one of those things happens to be legalizing prostitution. I remember it must be like 15 years ago or even more when I saw this HBO special. I think it was called Cat House. And it might have been like a mini-series, I don't really remember. But it was about Nevada's prostitution and Nevada's legalized brothels here in the United States, specifically revolving around what is really a notorious brothel called the Bunny Ranch. And I remember watching this, I was like either a senior in high school or like just starting out at Northeastern. And I remember seeing this and thinking like, I had never thought about this issue of prostitution, this issue of the world's oldest profession of selling sex, and the legality or lack thereof of doing so not only in the United States, but actually around the world. And ever since that point, being somewhat socially liberal for my entire political life, really, since I was a teenager, this was always something where I was like, why isn't this legal? And today's video is simply kind of a plea with some statistics kind of buried in there and some information that I think is interesting and useful to the cause, but nonetheless, a plea to say to all of you out there who might be on the fence or who might not be thinking about it too much, why don't we legalize prostitution? What really is the downside to doing so? One of the things I take a lot of pride in my own political philosophy is what I kind of see as consistency. I think that there's a massive lack of consistency at both extremes on kind of the horizontal political spectrum, and I think that a lot of it doesn't really sync up with the ideals of liberty, at least the way I see them. For instance, I never could quite make sense of how a Republican, a card-carrying Republican in the United States, could be so pro-gun, could be so anti-tax. A lot of that kind of says, like, stay out of my business, let me do what I need to do, but they want to regulate who you fall in love with, the gender you identify as, who you have sex with, all of that. That doesn't sync up to me. That's why I can draw a through line between my pro-choice, pro-death penalty, pro-gay marriage, pro-gun stances and go on and on and on, even to something like prostitution and the decriminalization of drugs and all of those things. A lot of people call that libertarian, and then I guess in the main it is, but it's not so libertarian as it is, again, just consistently looking towards the individual and that individual's pursuit of liberty as long as he or she is not hurting anyone else. And the thing about prostitution, at least from what I've read and what I've seen about it, both, you know, in the limited legal spheres in places like the Netherlands and in Australia and in other parts of Western Europe and of course here in Nevada, is that there is seemingly a big difference between legalized and illegal prostitution, that illegal prostitution still makes up the lion's share of prostitution even in places where it is legal, and that women specifically seem to be the victims of sex crimes, sex trafficking, and all of these things that can be mitigated or completely nipped in the bud by simply embracing the sex trade and removing the stigmatization that revolves around it. The question I ask about prostitution is simply this: who is the government? Who is the government and as this apparatus able to tell two or more consenting adults, but let's just say two adults, let's say for the simplicity's sake, a man and a woman, both of legal age in the jurisdiction that they're in, who is the government to say that you cannot fork your money over to another person in exchange for sex as a service? I mean, it's just that. It's a service. It's an industry that caters to a really primal need, actually, in a lot of people. And again, it's often called the world's oldest profession for a reason. Prostitution is as old as the historical record. It has always existed. It's everywhere. It's deep in the Bible. It's in all of these different kinds of places. And over time, we've allowed it to be stigmatized, even though predictions are that perhaps 10% of men, and that's just 10% of men admitting, by the way, but 10% of men have had a prostitute, and that goes for, you know, kind of the global society. So 1 in 10 men have paid for sex. 1 in 10 men have done a lot of things, paid for a lot of legal things, totally above board things. And I don't see how the government has the right to come into your life and tell you that you can't fork over your money in some sort of financial transaction. In reality, who is allowed to do that? And who out there says like, oh, that's a good function of government to tell a person that this totally up and up transaction is not allowed to occur? I saw this quote in a Slate article as I was doing my research. It says, and I'm looking here at my laptop, it says, quote, "No matter the country and no matter its laws, men and women will buy and sell sex," end quote. And that was the most powerful sentence I had encountered in all my research on this in preparation for this video, because as I was finding, as I researched, I was finding fewer and fewer statistics, because I kind of went in being like, can I find the statistics I need to make my argument? And what I was realizing was, I'm not so sure that statistics are even necessary to make this argument. It's totally ludicrous that we can expect the government to step in and that somehow, just as we've seen with the drug trade, for instance, that the government can somehow make it better. In fact, when the government gets involved in vices, it often makes it worse. And here in the United States, we saw that, of course, with prohibition about 100 years ago. And more recently, starting in the late 70s and into the 80s, we saw that with the drug war, the war on drugs, which just made the problem more pronounced and harsher. Right now in the world, there are perhaps 40 million people acting as prostitutes, mostly women, but not all women. There are male prostitutes, and of course, there are also transgender prostitutes as well. 22 countries, as far as I can tell, have completely legal and regulated prostitution, including countries like I mentioned earlier, the Netherlands, of course, being the most famous, but Australia has a thriving sex industry. And then there are countries, strangely, lots of them actually, including in Western Europe, some in South America, some in Southeast Asia, where you can sell sex legally, but you can't buy it legally. And this is, of course, meant to kind of diminish demand. But again, as that Slate quote indicates, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be demand for sex. So my major question here is not only, in fact, where the government gets off, pardon the pun, in regulating your inability to do it, but why don't they get in on regulating your ability to do it? When I studied this, I of course went right to Nevada, one of our 50 states here in the United States, and the only place where you can legally sleep with a prostitute. Of course, prostitution, by the way, is a thriving industry in other cities where it's completely not allowed, including our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., which is one of the great prostitution capitals. And places like L.A., New York City, Atlanta, etc. also have thriving prostitution. But in Nevada, as long as your county has 700,000 or fewer residents, of which 12 counties in Nevada do, then you can have a brothel and legal prostitution. And 8 counties take advantage of this. There are 19 brothels currently doing business in the state of Nevada. In Nevada, women must pass background checks, they must pass drug tests, they must pass regular STD checks, they have to use condoms. Towards the latter, which seems unbelievable, there was actually a study done where 50 sex workers were polled about 3,290 clients that they had seen, in which not one of them apparently didn't use a condom, not one. So this, of course, makes things safer. Regulation indeed would make the sex trade safer and does make the sex trade safer in places like Nevada. Unfortunately, that dichotomy, the ironic kind of situation in Nevada is that Las Vegas, the city of sin right there in Nevada, doesn't have legalized prostitution, but perhaps 90% of Nevada's prostitution actually happens within Las Vegas. Which begs the question, why not just regulate it, legalize it, and make it above board? And Nevada does that. Nevada has had prostitution legal and actually for over 100 years, since 1913. But what I was surprised to learn is that there is no taxing there. So there's no benefit to Nevada to even make it legal. So there's no reason for them to really pursue this anymore. So it's actually kind of a dead end when you look at it as an example for the rest of the country. Unlike marijuana in places like Colorado, and unlike places in Washington, soon here in California, etc. and so on, they don't make a cent on it other than like regular local taxes, and there is no state income tax. But if the safety of the women, primarily women working as sex workers, is the most important thing, and I would say that it probably is the most important thing, then we have to look at it through those lenses as well. As I mentioned before, regulation in Nevada is a real thing. STD checks are a real thing. Drug and background checks are a real thing. And women there are making a lot of money. I read one piece about a woman who was making about $10,000 a week working as a prostitute in one of the brothels in Nevada. And in that same story, it's noted that, maybe with a bias, but nonetheless noted, that prostitutes there are relatively happy in the brothels, that they basically hold all the cards and have all of the control, that they're well protected, that their clientele is far above what you would find on the street as you're driving around looking for a cheap, $25 blowjob or whatever. Is that expensive? I don't know. Maybe the market's lower or higher than that. I've never actually solicited a blowjob from a prostitute. But the thing I found most interesting in that particular story was that they reported that perhaps 10% or 1 in 10 legal brothel prostitutes in Nevada are experiencing any sort of violence. That means that in such a violent field, which illegal prostitution is, illegal underboard, black market prostitution is a violent place, including with sex trafficking, a lot of dubious ages with these women or these girls, etc. and so on, lots of terrible things happening. Well, actually, you see a positive experience in a place like Nevada where the women are clean, the women seem to be making a lot of money, the women are in control and empowered, and more than that, they actually seem to not experience violence, which is great. But again, I have to go back to that Nevada experience of not taxing it, because even if you just made, say, federally prostitution legal, which is not possible, this is a state issue, so this is a 10th Amendment issue, but let's assume that it was legal in all 50 states. There are predictions that this would contribute something like $20 billion a year into the government's coffers, just making the act of prostitution, the act of paying for sex legal, just for federal taxes. We're not talking about state or local taxes where the states can absolutely clean up. Just based on paying your income tax to the federal government, that's $20 billion a year the federal government can make just by the 50 states agreeing to legalize the sex trade in such a way. And just imagine how that would fill the coffers of state and local jurisdictions, just like marijuana has done in places like Colorado and Washington. But we can look overseas for some examples of how to make this work here in the United States as well, and how it could work in other countries too. I was reading about the Netherlands sex trade. Prostitutes pay a 6% VAT, or a 6% VAT, value-added tax on their work. They have a trade union. The services and the agencies that have prostitutes are legitimized through licensing and regulation. And you can actually be an independent contractor in the Netherlands too as a prostitute, but you have to be regulated and licensed. The beauty of it is that no one's holding a gun to these girls' heads. They're doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they want to make an extra buck. And I think that's kind of the most powerful argument of all, really, when it all sheds away and it all kind of comes down to it. This is empowering to the people that want to do it. It destigmatizes them and makes them feel like part of a community, giving a service that maybe we wouldn't want to render ourselves, and maybe we look a little shadily at, but nonetheless, this is something that is necessary, I would even say, in society. And one of the great stories I found actually about prostitution and the legalization of prostitution actually has to do with the state of Rhode Island, the tiny little state of Rhode Island. Between 2003 and 2009 in Rhode Island, prostitution was unintentionally legalized based on this crazy loophole in their laws that took them 6 years to rectify. And what was fascinating was, in that time, violent rape, just rape in the state, precipitously fell in those 6 years. And there was no other correlation, by the way, with other violent acts like murder and assault and all that kind of stuff. Just rape fell like that. And STD contraction, especially with gonorrhea, actually fell in those 6 years as well. There's just these interesting statistics and this interesting anecdotal evidence that suggests that maybe this is something we want to pursue. But I want to bring it all the way back to the beginning of the video and make the same argument I made just over there, which was this. Who is the government to tell you that you can't do this, as long as everyone's consenting? I base a lot of my arguments on statistics and all that, and I think that that's fine. A lot of the videos are deep in with you know, and riddled with stats and references and all these kinds of things. You can look at all that. There's plenty of stuff out there on prostitution, but as I said earlier, the more I read about it, the more I realized that this was a matter of the heart. And I don't mean that in any other way than to say that this seems to be something that if you put it in a line with the little dominoes, it just fits right there with all the other cases of social justice, as it were. And I don't mean that in the negative social justice warrior way and all the the derogatory ways people talk about that term. I just mean in the terms of, like, prostitutes are legitimate workers. The need to pay for sex is a legitimate service, just like any other. And that is your right to go out and spend your money to do that. And the government can make hand over fist regulating and taxing it. So why don't they do it? I think it starts with you and I. I think it starts with, again, the demystification, the destigmatization, I hate saying that, I can't say it, of the entire sex trade. Why do we look at something that's so old and so rampant and so everywhere in world history, just completely ubiquitous no matter where you look, and look at it as such a negative thing? I think a lot of it starts with us at home, about looking at these things through a different lens, a 21st century, more socially progressive lens, where we realize that, hey, maybe this is no different than going and paying for a massage or some of the other things that a person might do to your body, perfectly legal. Well, why does it stop with oral or vaginal or anal penetration? It's just a little strange to me. So instead of me, I always talk to you, I always, let you know what I'm thinking, and I always want to hear from you, but I want this to be more of a conversation than anything else, because I'm really curious what you guys think about this. I wonder if a lot of you out there have given this any serious thought, because, again, I referenced that time 15 plus years ago when I saw that show on HBO, and I started to give it serious thought, and it's kind of been on my mind on and off ever since, because as we see progression in some social ways with kind of the destigmatization of drug use, and I don't mean that you should use drugs, I mean that, like, maybe this is something that's not a violent offense, that we should kind of be a little lighter on people that are suffering from drug addiction and all those kinds of things. At the same time that we've seen marijuana proliferate across the country, at the same time as we've seen gay marriage go from this really, really unpopular thing 10 or 15 years ago to wildly popular, widely seen around the country, and legal in more and more places every day, as we see transgender rights taking on, the bigots and all those kinds of things, we see kind of a thing where sex work is still stigmatized. Sex work is still looked down upon. And I think we should fight against that because, again, it's all about the consistency of our view of liberty. And the consistent view is that this should be legal just like any other service should be legal as long as you're within the parameters of age and consent. That's it. And I can't imagine a situation where legalizing, demystifying, destigmatizing, and allowing prostitution to happen within the bounds of legality will do anything other than benefit society in a multitude of ways. It will benefit the workers, the sex workers. It will benefit, frankly, the Johns, the so-called Johns that go and pay for this stuff that probably shouldn't be all that ashamed. If that's how they want to spend their money, if they want to do that, who the fuck are we to judge them for that? Like, why does it really matter? It also fills local, state, and federal coffers with lots of money that can be used for lots of things, like education, like infrastructure, and all of that. It goes back to this kind of inherently American contradiction that has really fostered over the years. Oh, we're cool with alcohol. We're not cool with drugs. Alcohol is more destructive than a lot of these things, but we don't like this stuff. And it goes with that with prostitution too. It's just random. It's almost like things are just taken out of the hat. Yeah, we're cool with this. Yeah, we're not cool with that. We're cool with this. We're not cool with that. It just doesn't make any sense. Let's just be consistent. All right, that's it for me. I want to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. As always, you can thumb up the video if you like it. Thumb it down if you don't. I'd really appreciate it if you shared it with your friends and family. You can go watch the playlist, watch the back catalog. There are 27 other episodes of Colin's Last Stand right now that you can go check out and I hope enjoy. And of course, this show is completely ad-free and independent. There are no ads running on YouTube. There are no baked-in ads, none of that. And that's thanks to your support at patreon.com/ColinsLastStand. For $1, $2, $5, $10, whatever a month, you can gain access to certain perks and fund this show and keep it ad-free for all. I look at it a little bit like PBS, a channel I very much enjoy. I love Nova and Frontline, for instance. Well, a small fraction of people pay for those shows, and everyone can enjoy them for free. So whether or not you're a paying subscriber to Colin's Last Stand, you are very welcome in this community, and I really do appreciate your love and support. But Patreon keeps this show chugging along, so please consider it. All right, that's it for me. I'll see you next time for Colin's Last Stand. Keep on learning.